Hi, I'm Ralph W. Sevenor from Wayne Alarm Systems. Welcome to our Wayne Alarm Antique Corner Minute. And we spent a few minutes in going over the old technology of the electronic security industry. So I thought I'd talk a little about this device called a direct wire board. And there's an interesting story to this. I'll give you a little history to it afterwards. But customers' premises used to actually be wired through telegraph wires, and from their customer premise directly to here. At the time, they didn't have locks and switches to turn the alarms on. They actually had a day-night switch at the subscriber premise, and it would signal to an operator in the central station to turn the actual protection on. This actually is unrestored, so beautiful piece of equipment. And as I told you before, I was going to give you a little history. This actually came from a company called Rhode Island Electrical Protection in Providence, Rhode Island. And this was built by Edwin T. Holmes, shipped to Providence, Rhode Island, and put into service in the early 1900s. And it was actually in an old central station in North Providence, Rhode Island, that was bought by ADT. Long story short, they had to change the monitoring center, the central station, being 24 hours. What they decided on doing was closing one floor, operating a duplicate central station. So they then gutted out the old central station and operated out of the new central station. What happened is this was actually in a small room, a small closet, and they inadvertently had sheetrocked over this small room in the 1950s. So from the 1900s to the 1950s, this was in service in the old central station, was inadvertently covered up. In the 1990s, when ADT, who purchased RIEP, Rhode Island Electrical Protection, moved, they moved out of that location. They had urban explorers come into this building and discovered there was a hidden room, and in that hidden room was this device. So this was brought from North Providence, Rhode Island to here, to Lynn, and really was unrestored. So just a little history to it. As we talked about, there were customer units were here, the modules were here, and a light, green light, red light would symbolize you can turn the alarm on and off. This right here is a subscriber terminal unit. Some people call them transmitters, customer subscriber terminals. And at the time, they didn't have locks or alarms or knife switches to turn the alarms on. So they used to actually tell the monitoring station to turn the alarm protection on. And to do that, they would flick this switch one way several times. At the other side, from the standpoint of the direct wire receiver, a bell would sound, a light would flash, and they would indicate. And as they flipped this switch, that light would flash. It would indicate to the central station operator to then engage the protection. So interestingly enough, the protection was engaged or turned on from the central station side, not from the customer side. So this is an example of one of them. And this one above here is an example of another one. This one happens to be an ADT. It does show the day-night position. So in essence, when a customer wanted to leave their premise, they would flick it to night, perhaps a couple of times. The bell would sound, the light would flash at the monitoring center, and they would then leave. The customers at the time had schedules. So if they were to come in at 9 a.m., they could only come in 5 of 9 or 5 past 9. If they came inside of that time frame, everything was fine. Outside of that time frame, then they would send the authorities and send an inspector. This again is another example, and this one has the switch on the side. And that's the concept of direct wires. The limitations of this was distance, and the distance was determined because it was a DC circuit. You could only go so far, and that was mathematically about 30 miles. So to send a direct wire circuit, you had to be within that 30-mile range of the central station. We've now seen both sides. We've seen the customer side, also known as the subscriber side. We've also seen the central station side. So this is the direct wire side. We've seen the subscriber side. Again, the limitations were 30 miles. The protection was turned on and off from the central station. And this was actually readily in use until the 1950s, right into the early 1970s in some instances. Obviously, with the expenses of phone lines and telegraph lines going to the wayside, it dropped off significantly. But it was amazing we had a technology that lasted so long. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us at the Wayne Alarm Antique Minute.